Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following. Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. Main Source Bank, headquartered in Greensburg, Indiana, offering products and services to fit every stage of life. More information at mainsourcebank.com. Main Source, life needs a great bank. Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
Smithville Communications, serving Southern Indiana with high-speed fiber gigabit internet. Smithville Fiber Gigabit Technology. Tap the power.
And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk, an HIV epidemic in southeastern Indiana is spreading.
20 to 25% of people who have HIV do not know it. So they are unknowingly passing this virus on to people.
The complications state and local health officials are facing as they try to contain the outbreak. The Department of Children's Services is in violation of the law.
They are overloaded with cases. They're asked to do so much more per case, and they just don't have the time to do it.
Staff members are handling more cases than legally allowed. Ahead, why the agency is holding off on asking legislators for money to hire additional caseworkers. Thousands gather to pay tribute to the man affectionately known as Father Ted. We take you to the remembrance and have more on the legacy Father Hesburgh leaves behind. Plus the latest news from across the state right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Indiana's HIV outbreak is a reminder that the disease that took hold in the U.S. in the 1980s is still present. Since state health officials declared the outbreak last week, the number of cases has continued to climb. The disease spreads rapidly, and the only way to know if you have it is to get tested. Sarah Whitmire reports on the complicated task health officials face in tracking down those people who might be infected and then containing the unprecedented outbreak.
The HIV outbreak is centered here in southeastern Indiana.
The counties that are being affected have said to have a good rate of HIV in the first place. And those actually working in the counties every day with HIV patients are like, well, we don't really consider this an outbreak. We're just seeing an increased number of cases.
But this region normally sees fewer than 5 new cases of HIV in an entire year. Compare that to the latest numbers from the State Department of Health, which show 27 confirmed positive HIV cases and 10 more preliminary positive cases since mid-December.
The counties that are being affected, they do have a high percentage of those living in poverty, as well as those without health care compared to Indiana state averages and U.S. averages. So they do have a lot of risk factors.
There are 5 counties involved, with the small town of Austin hit hardest. The current thought is the outbreak originated here.
We don't have a record of an HIV outbreak quite like this in the state of Indiana, at least since the early 2000s that we know of.
In addition to sheer numbers, this outbreak is different because the virus is being predominantly spread through the use of injectable drugs. When the HIV epidemic began in the 1980s, the virus was primarily transmitted through sexual contact. And that's begun to change over the years, but still, only about a third of HIV cases nationally are attributed to needle sharing and misuse of needles.
Sharing needles is a very risky proposition, any way you look at it.
HIV can be spread by sharing the same needle with someone infected with the virus, but a lot of people don't know about the dangers of indirect needle sharing. The water used for the product can be contaminated, and so can the cotton that's used as a filter.
They are unknowingly passing this virus on to people because they don't know they have it.
Lisa Nelson is a care coordinator with the AIDS Resource Group in Evansville, which serves several communities in the southern part of the state. She advocates everyone be tested.
You would run this around your gums. You put it in a solution.
But some counties, including Scott County, the center of the outbreak, don't have the resources to test for HIV. The state is working to equip those counties, and Walthall says the Department of Health has enhanced its own lab services as well. But an outbreak like this is unprecedented in Indiana, and Walthall says the state is still exploring every possible containment option to make sure it's managed as quickly and effectively as possible.
We are currently working on identifying all contacts of any HIV positive individuals, and then if you can imagine sort of a spider analysis of what that looks like and how each individual is connected, so that we can identify all of those at risk and get them connected to care coordinator services for their HIV care. And then additionally, the most important part, I think, in addition to that HIV care, is making sure that we provide really aggressive services for substance use and addiction treatment.
Walthall says trying to predict the number of people exposed to HIV in this outbreak now would be incredibly difficult, but health officials in some of the affected counties say they wouldn't be surprised to see the numbers top 100. Sarah Whitmire joins me now to talk more about this story. The drug at the center, it's called Opana. It's not one of the drugs that we've heard before. Is this something new?
Right, it's not something that you hear a lot about. It's an opiate drug. It came up on the FDA's radar in 2010, 2012 that it was being used illegally, and they actually changed the formula. But it's a painkiller. It comes in an extended release tablet form, but it can be crushed, chewed, liquefied, and then injected.
Now, is this HIV outbreak a little bit more difficult to try and figure it out, just because usually you hear about sexual activity, but this is more centered on drug activity?
Right. Perhaps. It certainly complicates the matter a bit. Health officials that we've talked to who are in the counties say one of the first things they have to do is really build trust among these drug users, because if you think about it, people who are using illegal drugs are probably naturally more suspicious. They're going to be hesitant to turn over any of their contacts if it's found that they have HIV. So you can see then how that presents a really big problem. If you can't find the people who've come into contact with the drug, then they're potentially spreading it to a whole circle of people unknowingly if they're continued to engage in these behaviors.
So which way do they go now? Do they try to attack more on the actual drug or the outbreak of HIV?
Yeah, I don't know if it's fair to say that they're putting the drug use issue on the back burner, because it's certainly on everyone's radar and everybody's talking about it. But first and foremost, they've got to get the outbreak under control. As we said, the number of cases is increasing, and it's going to continue to increase here until they can get a handle on all the folks who have come into contact with this HIV virus.
Finally, one health worker in your piece recommended everyone get tested. Is that the advice I assume the state is giving out as well? Yeah, the state is saying the same thing. Certainly those folks who are engaging in those high-risk behaviors, sharing needles, engaging in unprotected sex, need to be tested now. But they say everybody needs to, because you don't know if perhaps your partner is injecting drugs, or they say it happens quite frequently where someone who thinks they're in a committed relationship, maybe their partner strays outside of the relationship and then unknowingly infects his or her partner. Sarah, thank you very much for this report.
Thank you, Joe.
Now for headlines, we go over to Alex Dirkman, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thank you, Joe. The state is shutting down the Hoosier State passenger rail line that runs between Indianapolis and Chicago effective April 1st. The line's future has been in doubt for months because of funding issues, but a spokesperson for the State Department of Transportation says that's not the reason for today's announcement. Instead, NDOT blames new federal requirements. A recent Federal Railroad Administration decision defined the state of Indiana as a railroad carrier, and NDOT says that designation comes with potential liability for the state of up to $200 million per incident, mandated new hirings, and classifying state employees as rail employees, meaning they'd be subject to new employment rules. NDOT says it unsuccessfully urged federal officials to reconsider their decision. Subsidies for thousands of Hoosiers with insurance under the federal marketplace are at stake in a lawsuit the U.S. Supreme Court took up this week. The lawsuit claims two clauses in the Affordable Care Act indicate subsidies are not allowed in states like Indiana that did not set up their own state-based health insurance exchanges. In arguments this week, Justices John Roberts and Anthony Kennedy appeared to be the two deciding votes. One of Kennedy's main concerns was the effect it would have on the healthcare system. A professor at Indiana University School of Law predicts the justices will uphold the subsidies.
not only will people be no better off than where they were before the statute, because there weren't these subsidies before the Affordable Care Act, but they'll be worse off, because carrying out the statute without the subsidies will really cripple the market for individual insurance.
The Supreme Court's decision is expected in June. The Indiana legislature appears poised to strengthen regulations against e-cigarette retailers, but e-cigarettes likely won't be added to the state's smoking ban. A bill the House has already approved and a Senate committee passed this week prohibits sales to anyone under 18 years old, ensuring e-liquids are prepared in rooms that are up to commercial food preparation standards and requiring tamper-proof safety caps. But both of Attorney General Greg Zeller's recommendations, imposing an excise tax on e-cigs and including e-cigs in the statewide smoking ban, were waved away by House and Senate lawmakers. Senate Minority Leader Tim Lannon says he may introduce an amendment to the e-liquids bill, putting e-cigarettes in the smoking ban. The Indiana House easily approved legislation repealing the state's common construction wage, and the bill's support in the Senate looks strong. The common construction wage is a kind of minimum wage for public construction projects that's been in place since 1935. But lawmakers say it is forcing state and local governments to pay too much for construction projects. Repealing the wage rule could save between 10% and 20% per construction project. Opponents say that number hasn't been proven accurate.
If you're repealing this thing, you're then transferring the costs of apprenticeship, of health care, of pensions onto the taxpayers. So in the long haul, it's going to be a taxpayer subsidy as opposed to a taxpayer savings. And that's the message we're trying to get to the senators right now.
If lawmakers don't drop their proposal altogether, which doesn't seem likely, they could decide to send it to a summer study committee and reconsider it next year. The Indiana Attorney General is asking the state Supreme Court to hear a case on whether the Department of Natural Resources can regulate high-fenced deer hunting. A lower court ruled earlier this year the DNR did not have the authority to ban the practice. Opponents of high-fenced hunting say it is inhumane and puts deer populations at higher risk of disease. Lawmakers are considering a measure this session that would place tighter restrictions on fenced hunting establishments. Attorney General Greg Zeller says the lawsuit should not stop lawmakers from moving forward on any bills they wish to debate. Earlier this week, Governor Mike Pence released the full report state leaders use for guidance in trimming the annual I-STEP test. Two national consultants Pence hired to advise the department and State Board of Education assembled the report. It recommends ways to shorten the assessment this spring and things to consider for next year's test. Some of those suggestions include assembling a technical advisory committee and working to improve interdepartment communication. The federal government required Indiana to create a new test after the state pulled out of the Common Core standards last April. Students across the state began taking the I-STEP last week. The window to complete Part 1 of the test ends Thursday. Nearly a quarter of Hoosier teens were not ready for college when they graduated high school. That's according to a report released this week by Indiana's Commission for Higher Education. Although this statistic is an improvement from past years, Higher Education Commissioner Teresa Leber says there are still too many students taking remedial classes in college. More than 1/3 of students with Core 40 diplomas need refresher courses in English and math. Leber says colleges and high schools are working more closely to narrow these types of gaps, adding that Indiana's new K-12 college and career ready standards will help. And finally, relief from the record-breaking cold is on the way, and you've earned it after another week of record low temperatures. When this prolonged cold spell breaks early next week, it will be the second coldest 3 to 4 week period for so late in the winter season since weather records began in 1871. But Joe, highs are expected to be around 40 degrees for the weekend and in the 50s by next week.
Well, it's good news for everybody, but especially parents that had to wonder every morning, is it a 2-hour delay? Is school closed? Thanks, Alex.
Yes.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Children will be harmed if the Department of Child Services doesn't add more social workers. That's the message from some state legislators. Ahead, why agency officials say that might not be the best solution. After laying Reverend Theodore Hesburgh to rest, friends and colleagues take a look back at the life of the longest-serving Notre Dame president, who was a champion of civil rights and an advocate for the voiceless. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
PBS kicks off the weekends with Charlie Rose and America's top newsmakers on his new series, Charlie Rose, The Week.
Some people say, well, Obama was this raving liberal before, now he's, Dick Cheney.
Recap the week's biggest stories and Charlie's best interviews.
You feel there's this incredible synergy between the audience and the performer, and time slows down.
And get a look at the week ahead. Charlie Rose, The Week. Check local listings.
Frontline provides me with information that makes me think.
First I shout at the television. You gotta be kidding!
You won't see this anywhere else.
The stories hit close to home.
Truth is a very valuable commodity.
They're uncompromising.
I want to do something. I want to take action.
It changed the way I actually live my life.
It lets me make up my mind.
I trust it.
When I watch Frontline,
it makes me angry and it makes me want to voice it.
I want to make a difference.
We can make a difference.
Frontline.
These guys are my heroes.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Indiana's Department of Child Services isn't meeting the legal requirements for the number of cases its workers can take on. They would need 77 additional family case managers to comply with the law. But instead of asking legislators for money to hire more workers, DCS is conducting an internal workload study. As Barbara Harrington reports, that has some worried about the welfare of children.
These are the faces of fighters, volunteers from Monroe County CASA who fight for the well-being of children.
We are a nonprofit organization that recruits, trains, and then we supervise community volunteers who advocate for the best interest of the children who are in the court system because they've been abused or neglected.
Volunteers spend a lot of time outside of the CASA offices, taking books and toys to the children they advocate for, hoping to make a traumatizing situation a little bit easier. And they work closely with the Department of Child Services.
Our CASAs have to have direct contact on a very regular basis with DCS to make sure that everything is going smoothly, to share ideas, to share information.
But what many volunteers have seen lately is troubling. DCS caseworkers are overworked. Monroe County CASA Executive Director Kristen Bechet says she doesn't know a caseworker who logs fewer than 60 or 70 hours per week. And she says that's having an impact on kids.
They see so much of what needs to happen with a child, with a case to move it forward, and no matter what they do, they just can't get it done. And it frustrates them to the point that they leave.
DCS has come under a lot of fire in the past few years. Former DCS Director James Payne resigned from his position in 2012 after he was accused of intervening in a case involving his grandchildren. That same year, the legislature formed an oversight committee to address complaints about how DCS handles cases and its lack of preventive services. Mary Beth Bonaventura took over as the executive director of DCS in 2013. She says this most recent controversy over caseloads is one she's taking seriously.
We thought as a team that it was prudent of us to really study our caseloads, our workload versus caseload. We are doing things somewhat different than we did when the caseload standard was established in 2005.
Bonaventura says over the past 2 years, DCS has added 246 family case managers. She hopes the study will reveal a more long-term solution to the increasing workloads caseworkers are facing. In 2009, the DCS hotline fielded 109,000 calls. Last year, that number almost doubled.
We're hoping and the goal is, and our contract is with Deloitte, that their study will be done by March 15th, which is before the end of the legislative session. And the goal is that we will then, if we need them, that I'll go forward and go to the end of the earth to make sure that we get what we need to keep kids safe.
But Senate Minority Leader Tim Lannon is worried about the timing because the state is crafting its biannual budget now. He estimates it would cost $7 to $8 million to hire an additional 77 workers.
That study determines that we need to have 77 additional caseworkers, as we feel is the case. Certainly we're going to need to have to make that a priority in the budget. I hope we're going to be able to do so at that time. I'm going to be the loudest voice
out there to insist that that would be the case.
Lannon also wants to have plenty of time to examine the results of the study. He wants to make sure the recommendations are about what's best for children, not what's best for the bottom line.
That's got to be the key, is what are the safe numbers? Not just by, what can we get by with? What's efficient in terms of dollars only, is what is a safe number?
Back at Monroe County CASA, Bechet doesn't know how caseworkers will manage in the meantime. She says the issues with DCS can't be solved at the local level. So she hopes legislators will take a hard look at what's going on and fight for more family case managers.
It's as important as life and death. They are there to protect the child and to offer services for the families. And so literally, if they don't do their job well, it could mean death of a child or more harm to a child.
Once the study is complete, DCS will determine whether to request additional funding. That money wouldn't become available until the next fiscal year that begins on July 1st. Political and religious leaders are remembering the late Notre Dame president, Reverend Theodore Hesburgh, as a champion of human rights. As Gretchen Frazee reports, the man affectionately known as Father Ted was laid to rest Wednesday.
In line with his last request, Reverend Theodore Hesburgh was given a traditional funeral mass at the Basilica on Notre Dame's campus.
In life, Ted gave himself to the Lord, and now we commend him to that same Lord. We cannot but believe that the Lord will respond in the words of today's gospel reading, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom."
He was then laid to rest in a small cemetery on campus with hundreds of students, friends, and colleagues looking on.
And he did it in such a quiet, unassuming, non-judgmental way.
The ceremonies ended with a tribute where national leaders gathered to honor the Notre Dame president, who's known for his many accomplishments, including opening Notre Dame up to women in 1972.
Father Ted, in his infinite wisdom, broke the barriers when he admitted women, he and Father Ned, in the early 1970s. And that was a good thing, because I met my wife in a history class here at Notre Dame.
But Hesburgh was also influential in national and global politics. He held 16 presidential appointments during his life and was known as a champion of civil rights, serving as a founding member of the Civil Rights Commission.
Father Hesburgh was that fearless fighter. But he inspires us all to take up that mantle and to fight for what is right.
He did so much for people everywhere, and the world will really miss this wonderful man.
Hesburgh died last week at the age of 97.
President Barack Obama also surprised the audience with a video message during Hesburgh's memorial tribute. Obama met Hesburgh when he spoke during Notre Dame's 2009 commencement ceremonies. And an Ivy Tech student is getting national recognition for his success at balancing work and school. This is only the second time the American Council on Education has bestowed the Student of the Year honor on a Hoosier. Casey Kuhn introduces us to L.J. Gearhart.
L.J. Gearhart has been working for McDonald's for 8 years.
I started as crew, fries on the weekends. It was my first job. It still is my first job.
Now the 24-year-old is a general manager at McDonald's and full-time student at Ivy Tech. He graduates this May with an associate's degree in business and a semester earlier than he expected. You can tell as he talks about his job just how much it means to him. He points out the custom window decals, the cardboard recycling, and the McDonald's flag flying as points of pride in his work. In announcing the selection as Student of the Year, American Council of Education's Deborah Seymour said Gearhart does a good job balancing the demands of family and professional responsibilities as he works to gain his degree. Gearhart sees a future for himself at McDonald's because he says it's not just a job. It's the people he sees every day.
This is my 5th restaurant that I've worked at, and I really enjoy just everybody that I meet and everybody that I honestly come across with.
In addition to the scholarship, Gearhart will be going to Washington, D.C. to accept the award. And world-renowned jazz composer, educator, and writer David Baker is being recognized as a living legend. The city of Bloomington recently honored Baker as a part of its Black History celebration. Baker chairs the jazz department at the Indiana University Jacobs School of Music. Despite performing around the world, Baker says working with students is as meaningful as anything else he's done.
Right now, I would bet you that I have 60 or 70 kids who are my private students, and I'm as proud of them as I can be, man, that more than anything else.
Baker has received dozens of other awards and honors during his distinguished career, including an Emmy for his musical score in the PBS documentary For Glory and Gold and the American Jazz Master Award. That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following: Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. Main Source Bank, headquartered in Greensburg, Indiana, offering products and services to fit every stage of life. More information at mainsourcebank.com. Main Source, life needs a great bank. Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
Smithville Communications, serving Southern Indiana with high-speed fiber gigabit internet. Smithville Fiber Gigabit Technology. Tap the power.
And by WTIU members. Thank you.